But I really didn't know if I knew how to do it. I had never done really a big comedy like that, and I was jumping into a studio movie. But Mike just said, he told them, don't call me anymore until you hire this guy. And It was like weeks and weeks we waited, and I was like, oh, this is I thought he was being suicidal. And he called me, he had jumped into the pool with all his clothes on, and his dogs were barking. He said, you got the job. And I was like...
Hello and welcome to My Hollywood Story. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. My guest today is Jay Roach, the filmmaker behind the 2019 Fox News drama Bombshell and the Austin Powers and Meet the Parents comedy franchises, which collectively have earned $1.8 billion at the global box office. I interviewed Jay for the first time in the summer of 2025 for his latest film, The Roses, and was so struck by his kindness, intellect, and uniquely cool demeanor. I was eager to learn more about what led him from a childhood in New Mexico to having one of Hollywood's most interesting directing careers. Listen in as Jay talks in front of an audience at Soho House, West Hollywood, about his unexpected pivot to filmmaking after studying economics at Stanford. He also talks about what his approach was in directing a juggernaut comedic talent like Mike Myers. Also, why Ben Stiller was leery at first of his helming Meet the Parents, and how his Emmy-winning HBO films Recount and Game Change reflect an unwavering fascination with the wilds of American politics. This episode of My Hollywood Story was recorded live at Soho House, West Hollywood. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and let us know what you think.
Hello.
Hello. So nice to see you. You drove all the way down from the Bay Area today. And tell me about the special experience you had last night at Stanford.
So I screened Austin Powers 1 with a group there that's called the Stanford Sunday Flicks. And it turned out that when I was in school there, I ran the Sunday Flicks. And it died for years before the pandemic, I think, maybe because of streaming, I don't know. But this one kid is trying to bring it back. And it was, when I did it, it was 2 big screenings in 1,200 seat theaters every Sunday for a lot of boards, Stanford kids to get a break from finals or whatever. And it was great, but I did it as a business, as a job, a work study job, and it introduced me to so much more cinema, and I decided not to continue with my pre-law efforts, and I was an econ major, and that seriously, they screened my film there as I saw the screen. It said ASSU Sunday Flicks, the Austin Powers, and I was like, oh my God, I can't. What a strange circle, to come back to that.
Well, I want to start to delve into how exactly you had that journey because it is a fascinating one. And your story begins in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Tell me how it came to be that you were born in New Mexico.
My parents are Texan, and they went to high school and kind of courted in Amarillo, Texas. What a sweet spot Amarillo is. Have anybody from Texas here today? Oh. Are you from Texas? Oh, what part? Oh, yeah, that's better. But my dad worked for the defense industry. He's still alive. They could rehire him today to pick up on the nuclear testing, because that's what he did. He went underground at the Nevada test site every Monday, installed some experiment. They would blow off a nuclear blast. He would go back in and retrieve it, and that was his job. And he was a draftsman who turned himself into a mechanical engineer. Anyway, Sandia Laboratories, Los Alamos, they're all in Albuquerque.
Was he able to tell you about his job at the time? Or
he wasn't.
Okay.
And it actually had a bit of impact on Meet the Parents because it was a house of secrets. And it was also an extremely strict household because he had top secret clearance, and if his kids were drug addicts, then it would look bad. So he was always, you have to be in by 11, you have to cut. He used to hold me down when I was a little kid and give me a crew cut because I've always liked long hair. He's a good guy, but he was worried.
Sounds like the Great Santini a little bit.
He was a little bit. That's so funny you say that. But it was also De Niro's, like I'm watching you was, he did that with us when we were hunting. I grew up hunting, and he was like, I'm watching you, don't mess up, So
that's a lot of rigor to grow up around.
It was an interesting challenge. But
how do you think that shaped how you saw yourself when you went to school and when you pursued activities?
Well, I think it helped in some ways because he had such an intense work ethic, and he really had high expectations of all of us in that great sense anyway. But it also, I guess growing up that way, they really didn't have time to see films and do art. You know, they didn't go to college. I was the first kid in my family that went to college, and it just wasn't a place where I got exposed to a lot. And I went to a big public school, and I hadn't really left the state of New Mexico until I got into Stanford University. And when I went there, it was just like, oh my God, I'm so unprepared for this. And so I sort of overcompensated, and I have a project that I'm working on about this experience, but I just chose not to sleep anymore. And when you don't sleep, as they say, and the only school in the country that had a sleep and dreams program that you could actually major in sleep and dreams was Stanford University. So I volunteered for the sleep and dreams experiments, and you would get paid, but they would wire you up and see when you went into REM sleep and and it was that was not a good coping strategy, because if you do, as William Dement, the head of the program, said, if you don't hallucinate at night in your dreams, you will hallucinate all day long. So that's what I'm actually working on a project.
This explains the long hair, Jay. I get it now. You're a hippie. This is all making more sense.
Yeah, but I just miss the Ken Kesey days up there, because and I always envied that because they were looking for something,
sure.
you know.
That was the time.
That was the time.
So, but what was your earliest exposure to cinema? Was there a film you saw on your own with your friends at the theater? What was that experience
most
like?
of my experience with cinema were at the drive-in. That's the only. My parents weren't that well off, so we would all pile in the car and go see Matt Helm movies, Dean Martin.
Okay, sure.
Did you ever say he was it was kind of the Austin Powers before the Austin Powers,
Right,
but he was a drunken Austin Powers. Matt Helm would they would have a shootout in a brewery, and he would lean over, and when the bullet punctured the beer keg, he would just drink and then get back into my dad loved that guy, and he loved James Bond, and I think because he thought of himself as a kind of James Bond,
secret
even
agent
though he
man.
was a little bit of a poor man's James Bond.
And do you have siblings?
Yeah,
Okay.
2 brothers and a sister.
And what was your dynamic like with your brothers?
They're very different people. You know, I was a little nerdier. My one brother is a truck driver. My other brother is a dude ranch wrangler. They're cowboys. They really are. I mean, they chew tobacco, and they, you know, like, I'm serious. They came from, they're more Texan. I don't know why that didn't quite take with me. I got into other things, and so I was the black sheep.
So when you got to Stanford, you were going to originally study economics.
Yeah.
And when did that shift happen? Was it when you started to curate the films?
It was a combination of things. I had a few work study jobs. When I was up there, I went on a kind of nostalgia tour on my bicycle. I went to all the places where I did convert to a filmmaker from a pre-law. I was going to do a JD MBA. I just was trying to do something practical, and I started doing still photographs. There's a famous photography professor up there named Leo Holub, and I took it, and I found out there was a darkroom in the basement of my dorm, and so I just shot a lot of stills, and I was doing the Sunday Flicks thing, and I was getting introduced to film. I was a projectionist in a Japanese film series, and I got turned on to Kurosawa. In the film series, I would see, like, David Lynch movies and Annie Hall and Shampoo, and things that I found. I was struggling so much to find an ability to make fun of myself, and also make fun of dysfunction in a way, which is kind of what was so great about doing The Roses, because I was able to tap back into that. A lot of the other comedies, well, I guess Meet the Parents was a functional dysfunction.
Greg had
funny
some
dysfunction.
issues.
Yeah. Anxiety Dream, and David Lynch was. So when I saw, you can tell stories about that, and you can cope with your own bullshit by, portraying bullshit. So.
Do you find that cathartic, that when you are able to portray it, you actually feel at ease?
I do. I find it, anything that makes you take yourself a little less seriously is always a healthy thing. And the characters I have worked on are so often so dysfunctional and so delusional. To have a little tiny bit more self-awareness through humor, and even if you're just saying to the audience, hey, this person's really fucked up, right? Are you fucked up? Do you like this? Oh yeah, let's talk about that and joke about it. And
right. It creates a community.
That's a trust thing. It's a bond, and it's So I thought, you can do that for a living, and so then I applied to film school. I made a couple short films up there, and I worked in a video documentary kind of place, and And then I applied to USC Film
So you
School.
moved here to study
Yeah,
film.
yeah.
Okay. And what did you learn at USC that has most carried you through your job?
You know, it was USC was a lot about the other students. The faculty were good, but the students were amazing. The other people who were going there, Michael Lehman, I went to school with. Larry Karaszewski.
I was going to say you probably had some good classmates.
Oh my God,
Larry's the best.
Unbelievable. Scott Alexander, Larry's partner, Phil Giuano, Ken Quapis. I mean, there were so many cool people that we stayed close, and the peer group was mutually supportive. You know, but the thing that I was just saying this last night when I was talking about this, that the film school was a political nightmare because USC had this thing where they were like, I don't know, 50, 100 students. I don't actually know how big the class was, but they only chose 5 directors a year, or 5 directors, a year actually, not a semester, a year, to make a film. And so you had to play the game and impress people and get a crew. You'd have to get a crew and you'd get a little cat. And it was so much like the studio system turned out to be.
It's a dress rehearsal for what's to come.
And it was a nightmare. And everyone was literally losing their mind. I looked it up too, that the school USC is a huge school. It's, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people, but the film school was only 100 people, and they use like 25% of the student counseling services. So you knew everyone was stressed out of their minds, way past finals, or just leading a group, making a film and everyone was nuts, you know, and that was good.
Okay, so I read that in the late 80s, you worked as a cameraman on a video for Eazy-E.
That's true.
I need more information about this.
It was
Where was this filmed?
The camera experience I had were so few and far between, but really interesting. My close friend John Miller became a big-time video director and did a bunch of big acts at the time. And we had worked together on a Greg Beeman film, and I was the camera person on that. And I was never a great camera person, but I was a really good operator, and he needed just a second operator on an
And for those who may not understand the nuances of being a DP versus camera operator, can you kind of break down what those jobs are?
Well, the DP is in charge of everything, lighting and the framing and the way the dolly moves.
Really, the look of the film.
The overall look of the film. But the camera operator is it's literally the best job in the world. I constantly ask myself, why didn't you just keep doing that? Because it's the least neurosis making job, because you just sit there and soak in all the great feast of talent, that, you know, the great acting, the great set design, and you just sit there and go, I think I'll point this way and I'll point that way and I'll frame it like this. And now it's even easier because there are video taps on always. You're watching a monitor, so you can, in the old days, you were responsible for making sure the shot was right, and they'd say, how was it? And you had to always say, oh, it's great, or it's not workable, let's do it again. Now there's 50 people watching the monitor to make sure. But it's a really fun job and a much less stressful job than any other job in the whole business. I'm really that and music supervising. I think those are the 2 great gigs you can get in a.
And tell me about, did you actually have contact with Eazy-E, who of course was the late rapper? Okay.
No, I didn't. I was when you're a B camera operator, and I think that's all I was. I wasn't even the A camera operator. You're just grabbing cutaways, you know, of the crowd or sometimes of him, but just a different angle. That's the thing. I was never a big deal cinematographer. But I did it enough to know what it meant to do it. So I worked really well with the DPs I've worked with.
Well, that makes sense. And then how did Zoo Radio come to you as an opportunity? This is a film in 1990, co-directorial debut.
I got that gig. I don't even remember how I got it, but there were these 2 guys who had some money and they wanted to make a comedy, and I had a film that I'd made at USC that was sort of funny, but I didn't really have a way to break into the business, and I said, okay, I'll try. And 2/3 through it, it was such a horrible script that I would rewrite it each night before I shot, and I wouldn't tell them what the scenes were, and I just show up and start doing it, and they always were much funnier than the scenes, but they got so mad at me that they fired me and took over the editing, and and I was, if I was in the DG, I would have been whatever the pseudonym was, but I couldn't do it. It wasn't a guild thing, So I always try to convince people that was not my film because I really had nothing to do with it. They reshot everything I did.
I couldn't find it anyway to watch because it's not really available.
Thank God. I hope I would. If you found some, tell me. I will try to burn them.
And is it true? Is it true Paul Feig was an actor in this
Paul
movie?
Feig was in it, yeah.
And of course, he's the director of Bridesmaids and Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that he had started as an actor.
I worked with him on another film called Happy Jack or something. I don't know. A little teaser that the head of the stockroom was always trying to make feature films, and I made another film with Paul. He was there at USC. He was an actor, filmmaker even then, but
very funny.
Both of us tried to deny that even exists. So thanks a lot for bringing that up.
That's why I'm here, Jay. So I also saw your credit on Blown Away.
That I'm proud of.
Okay, which I remember distinctly seeing this movie. It's an action drama starring Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones as a bomb expert and an Irish terrorist, respectively. And it made over $50 million. It was actually a very successful movie, but
no big deal.
That feels different from the films you have made since. So
yeah, it was. I worked with these. One of my, after I graduated from college, it took about 10 years out of film school to get Austin Powers, which is the first real job that I feel like I had a real directing job. But before then, I was a writing assistant for years with a trio called Trilogy Entertainment, Penn Densham, John Watson, and Richard Miller. And they made, not Richard Miller, Richard Lewis. They made Backdraft, Blown Away, and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner.
All big hits. And
they were actually big hits, and they were cool producers, and they let me write on things and kind of, be, but Penn had this idea of doing a bomb squad thing, and I said, funny, my dad knows a little bit about explosives, so I cooked up this story with two friends, John Rice and Joe Batir, about a guy who knows about the IRA and maybe was involved in it, but has come to Boston, Jeff Bridges, to sort of redeem himself and do good with his knowledge of explosives, and becomes a bomb squad person. And then Tommy Lee Jones, who has a backstory with him, tracks him down, and then becomes a bomb thing. And I just wrote the story with them, and then they wrote the script on spec, and it went forward.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Did you get approached to do more dramas in that vein after that?
Not really. Man, you're really going into this. There was a whole period where I was just all over the place, and
were you trying to find your voice as an artist or as a
so.
writer?
And because I didn't have much, I didn't have much background in film. I didn't really know that much about film, and I was always catching up, and I learned as I went.
It's hard to compete, I think, with Spielberg, who's like, I was making Super 8 movies in my backyard, and if you're somebody who's trying to find who they want to be,
found late in life that I might be able to do this, and then I got so many lucky breaks. But I did catch up eventually. I mean, at least a little bit. But at that time, I was just trying to figure out what would be and I was more interested in drama and more interested in psychological. I was more into being David Lynch than I was into being Woody Allen. And so I was looking to do more serious things. And I thought if you could do something it was an action film, but it had a psychological, political thing. Yeah. And I didn't, so then I wrote, for that same company, I wrote some science fiction stuff. I wrote this really cheesy show called Space Rangers with Linda Hunt. And then I wrote a thing called Life Pod, which was a weird twisted remake of Lifeboat, the Hitchcock film that Ron Silver directed.
Oh my goodness.
And I did all these weird sci-fi things, and the guy I worked with became the head of Sci-Fi Channel, but they didn't know, they had never done science fiction. So I loved science fiction. I thought I would become a science fiction filmmaker. Wow. So I know, see, there's no straight line. This is a problem for me because it's not like an auteur's path.
But this is why you're interesting, Jay.
How about this? How about that? How about this?
I think more people can relate to this journey than someone like Spielberg's who had this rarefied life.
I'm envious of those guys though, because they knew what they were doing really early.
Well, I think they're in the minority, frankly. So let's talk about Austin Powers now. 1997, International Man of Mystery. Again, I remember seeing this in the theater, laughing. So funny.
Thank you.
Worldwide gross of $68 million. Again, amazing. And written by Mike Myers. So is it true that Mike's inspiration for this character has a connection to your wife, Susanna Hoffs? Who's the lead singer of the Bangles, by the way.
Okay, so there's the whole Susanna Hoffs connection, but it's not quite. It was more okay. So let me see if I can tell a quick version of it. Sue knows everything about film, way more. She grew up with her.
You
mom
told me this
was
summer
a
she's a
director,
real
her
nerd.
dad
a
was
film
a
nerd.
shrink in the business, and Shrink was the psychiatrist for so many famous people. And she grew up with Ben Gazzara and John Cassavetes and their kids in Brentwood. So she knew way more about film, and she got to know Mike Myers' wife, and we
Robin?
started bonding. What's
Robin?
that? Robin, yeah. They started sort of hanging out, and then I started hanging out a little bit with Mike, but I was kind of intimidated by him. He was already such a, I always already revered his comedy. And he said, "Why don't you read this script? I've been riffing on the script." So I gave him notes on Austin Powers, and he said, "Will you help me find a director for it?" Because he'd had some interesting experiences, not all great, with some directors.
And he was done with SNL by this point.
He was done with SNL.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this
He
is
had done Wayne's World. He had done So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Right.
And he had just done Wayne's World 2.
Okay.
So he'd done those 3 films, and he was already an established comedy movie
And it's
star.
not, and for people leaving SNL, that transition to becoming feature film stars can be very
it's
bumpy.
hit or miss.
Right.
Speaking of, Will Ferrell's first feature was Austin Powers 1. So
course.
we helped Will get going too. But I gave him notes. I found a director I thought he should hire, who was a cool commercial guy, and he said, "I've put you up for the job." And I was like, "What?" And it turns out my wife, Sue, had conspired with him and the Todd sisters, Susanna and Jennifer Todd, who are really cool producers. Jennifer had been a student of mine when I was teaching cinematography. Suzanne had produced my student film, and they all conspired to put me up for the gig, but they didn't tell me about it. So when I finally found out, they said, "Yeah, you got to go in and do a presentation." And so Sue was in on the conspiracy, and she just said, "I didn't want to tell you because I thought you might back out of, you wouldn't feel entitled for it."
How did you feel when you knew about this plan?
Well, I was thrown, and I just said, okay, because it was an opportunity, and Mike seemed to have some weird faith in it. So I went to meet with the studio, and they said, "We're not going to hire you. We're not going to just hire Mike's buddy. Do you have a reel? Do you have any background?" I'm like, "No, but there's a few films I really like that I want to show you." So I cut little clips together with Mike DeLuca and showed him clips of films that I thought could be influential. Blow Up, the Pink Panther series, really cool pop art European films, Danger of Diabolique and The 10th Victim. There's a whole list
kind of a tone sizzle in a way.
Yeah, and saying tone can be funny if it's exaggerated, because they were really campy movies, and everyone was a little skeptical that style, it might get too stylish, you might not be funny, and I was like, I think it could be. And we talked about Young Frankenstein a lot as the model for, the world can be built around the characters, and you can commit to a world and still not have it look like just, I don't know, a lot of comedies.
It's sort of, you're playing it straight, but it's absurdity within the straightness.
But every decision is from the characters. Like Pee-wee's Big Adventure to me was always a great example of that.
That is a great example.
So, but I really didn't know if I knew how to do it. I had never done really a big comedy like that, and I was jumping into a studio movie. But Mike just said, he told them, don't call me anymore until you hire this guy. And it was like weeks and weeks we waited, and I was like, this is I thought he was being suicidal. And he called me, he had jumped into the pool with all his clothes on, and his dogs were barking. He said, you got the job. And I was like, so amazing. Yeah, he was.
Thank you, Mike. In terms of Austin Powers sort of taking over the zeitgeist, when did you know that this thing had really entered the ether? I know that people wouldn't shut up. And I think every kid in school was doing Austin Powers at school and driving teachers crazy. But when did you feel that this character had become a thing?
It wasn't exactly that big of a hit when it first came out. It didn't open in Europe at all because Princess Diana died the weekend.
So it came out summer of 97?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
And it had no international presence. It did okay domestically, but for a Mike Myers movie, it wasn't anything like Wayne's World in terms of how big of a hit it was. But Warner Brothers and New Line were the pioneers of DVD. They were the first studios to try DVD, and our video was one of the first. And we did a director's commentary, which I didn't even know what that was, and we just had beers in Vegas and were giving each other shit during watching the film, and it became that took off, that home video thing. So I knew it was a hit when the sequel opened and everyone came in costume, and it was a $300 million, worldwide thing. And it was like, oh my God. It was all off of video. It was all off of home video, which was a lucky timing thing. It wasn't.
Office Space had the same trajectory. It opened in 99, was a flop. And then the minute it started airing Comedy Central and was on DVD, it became the thing that everybody was watching.
Thank God for
I know. Thank God for
technological innovation.
So the highest grossing Austin Powers is actually Gold Member. And this was Beyonce's starring role, her first ever appearance. What is it like to direct someone who is iconic in her sphere, but hasn't actually done an acting role?
So she had done another film. She had done this interesting indie opera film called Carmen.
Sure.
Isn't that right?
Carmen, a hip hop reference.
Yes, I do remember this.
So
yes.
she she was really good in it, but it wasn't anything like doing a comedy.
Right.
But somehow John Lyons, who was a casting director, then was P.T. Anderson's producer for a long time, and then became our producer. I think he gets credit for having the idea of her playing Foxy Cleopatra. And we met with, we just got really lucky. She was big. Destiny's Child was a huge thing, but it wasn't anything like where she is now. But her mom loved those films, the blaxploitation films, and she just
the Pam Grier's
all that stuff. Right. So Pam Grier, who was my mother-in-law's friend, but her mom was such a big advocate of it, and we whenever we met, the mom was always there. And so I was pitching it to her, and Beyonce just took it and ran with it, and she was so great, she was so easy.
She's
and
a consummate pro,
and just fearless too, to be with Mike Myers and to be doing your first comedy. I mean, it was really cool
experience. How you worked with him at that point on 2 films. What is his experience in working with someone who's, quote, untested in this space?
With her?
Yeah, with
He's
Beyonce.
So supportive and generous. He was great with all the other cast, because some of them hadn't, Will hadn't done a movie before, Mindy Sterling, all those people had, were kind of, I don't know, it was always, but he had an SNL kind of, come on in, we'll just try some stuff. And he was, he was intense about his own stuff, but he was really, really generous. And particularly with her, he was shy around her, and he was boyish in a sweet way. And that seeing Austin, and you can see it on screen, it becomes part of the thing, that he enjoys making her laugh. He enjoys, I don't know. He seemed to bask in her. And that was a part of the secret to our whole thing on those films, is casting people that we loved so much. Michael York, Michael Caine, RJ Wagner, to get them to come and be in our films.
were you surprised when people like that were saying yes?
I was. I mean, my favorite story of that is Mike said, I think we'll do and the third one, we'll do a thing where we imagine what would Hollywood do if they took over Austin Powers. And so I want to get Tom Cruise to play me, Gwyneth Paltrow, all of them that ended up in the film. He just said, I'm going to get Steven Spielberg to pretend to be the director. And we're like, come on, can we get back to what we can actually pull off? And he just had a feeling they would all show up, and they all showed up. And Danny DeVito is Mini-Me. I remember saying, Danny doesn't want to play short people. Don't insult him by casting him as a short person. Cut to, I'm Mini-Me. He was so into it.
He does have a great sense of humor, though.
He was so into it.
Well, congratulations on that, because honestly, it's an indelible franchise, very rare achievement in these current times. And it's just so funny. I rewatched all the movies again because I had to for today. So that's a wonderful homework to have.
What's weird is watching it with current, 18, 19-year-olds like I did last night, because they don't know who Vanilla Ice is, and they don't know who Tom Arnold is, and they don't know, so many of the references did not work, and yet they were still getting some other aspects of it. But it was a little humbling, because I was like, oh man, I thought that was hilarious, but oh no, they're not getting the Richard Lester references from Hard Day's Night, but they all, over half of the audience last night had grown up with their parents watching Austin with them, and so that was cool. Wow. That was so cool.
It's a legacy.
That was amazing.
And on to another Juggernaut franchise, Meet the Parents, the first of which is hard to believe, 25 years ago, Jay. Meet the Parents came out in 2000.
So old.
Well, we all are. You're the director and producer, of course, working with Jane Rosenthal and Robert De Niro. And the first film was written by Jim Hertzfeld and John Hamburg, and music by Randy Newman. And I want to talk about working with Randy in a moment. But you sort of intimated a little bit the inspiration of the character of Greg, or maybe how you helped to inform that. Did these guys write the script and bring it to you, and then you sort of massaged it? Or what did it look like when it landed on your desk?
You know, I don't... So there were so many people, and it was such a collaborative thing. Jim Hertzfeld's original draft was so good and had so many of the moments that became the trailer moments.
Don't forget to hold your mic over your face.
Became the trailer moments. And when De Niro's daughter gets hit by the volleyball, or when Ben Stiller, loses the cat on the roof. All of them were in that original script. All the set pieces.
The lie detector was.
The lie detector was not. That was one of the ads later. Jim worked on it, but it wasn't a big deal in the original script. And then we did a read through that went so badly.
After everyone had been cast.
After everyone had been cast and waived script approval, which I didn't know that was the thing. Jeffrey Katzenberg taught me that. He said, "Yeah," I was like, "Why would I waive script approval? I want to have some." He goes, "Well, everyone else has, and the only way you can get a green light is everyone to say, we'll do this film no matter what happens with the script." And I was like, "Really? De Niro's never going to do that." And they said, "He already has, kiddo." And that's what I was like, oh, loss of innocence right there. But that we did the read through, and it didn't go well. So we brought in a friend of Ben Stiller's named John Hamburg, who then came up with a lot of stuff like the circle of trust. And the lie detector thing was De Niro's research, because he was trying to do research on the Good Shepherd, and he learned from all these CIA guys. And so that evolved in the prep I don't think it was in the original, but it became a much, much bigger deal. And I remember on the set that day, I took a picture and said, "This is the poster." And I handed it to the PR people and said, "I'm telling you this," and it was the poster.
It's a brilliant image.
Because my theory of comedy is that it's all about predicament. Like, just picture what is the worst possible version of the anxiety dream you would come up with about who is the character that you would dread meeting the most, what kind of situation would you put in, what are all the vectors that would mess you up, and then how are you, in coping with that, going to make it worse every single step. You're going to try so hard to deal with the predicament, but you're just going to make it worse and worse and
you're
worse.
in your pajamas.
And you're in your pajamas.
So you're very vulnerable.
Yeah. So that was the lie detector.
So it's interesting. I rewatched the first one the other day, and I mean, Ben and Robert are just, they're flawless no matter what
they're
they do.
doing a fourth one now. I'm producing it, but I'm not doing
You're EPing from a distance.
John Hamburg, that same
I thought that was very cool that he's directing.
Really great director.
So when you're directing someone like Robert De Niro and someone like Ben, each of them has their own genius. Certainly Robert, we didn't know him as a comedian and really kind of until this franchise. And Ben was sort of, we knew of him, but this was kind of a huge moment for him. What kind of direction are you giving these guys who really come in with a very specific, prescribed sense of what they want to do?
Yeah, different. They're so different. But remember, De Niro had already done Midnight Run and Analyze This by then. So he was already kind of like, maybe I could be funny. But he wasn't. He was surprisingly the opposite of method and totally directable. And the first few times I was intimidated by, I would just say cut, and then eventually he would just a few hours into the first day, he would say, "Don't say cut, just tell me what you want." And I was like, okay. So I would say, "Bob, could you?" A lot of it was because he enjoyed being funny. He would often try to be funny, and I would just say, "Could you try one a little straighter?" And I'd hear myself in the dailies directing Robert De Niro to stop mugging, and I was like, "Who are you? Why are you yelling?"
Did you have to sort of calm yourself and be like, "Oh my God, I'm directing Robert De Niro"? Like that must be
once you get into that zone, you're, at least for me, I'm in such a. It's why I probably am addicted to it, even though it's very stressful. That there's a flow state that kicks in, and if you just stay devoted to the story and to the situation, that's the only thing I think I got good at early on was. I have no ego about it. I'm not when I'm directing in prep, I'm a disaster. But on the set, for some reason, I've always gone to how can this be better? Maybe this could be better. Try that. Do that. And I didn't see that coming, you know. But with him, he trusted me, and I don't. That's amazing. Like, he trusted me. Ben was not so sure about me up front. Ben was like, you know, because he had such a good filmmaker's instinct. I had fallen for him with Flirting with Disaster, David O. Russell's film. And we borrowed a lot of that tension in our thing. So I totally trusted him, but he was rightfully kind of curious, because I'd done Austin Powers on a hockey movie before, this movie called Mystery Alaska. And maybe I had even done Austin 2 by then. But those were broad, campy comedies, and he wanted, rightly, that he wanted to make sure it was grounded.
Well, he's also a descendant of comedy royalty too.
I know. Have you seen his documentary?
I haven't yet, but it looks
so
amazing.
Good. Have anybody seen his documentary? Oh, it's fantastic.
About his parents. It's so stunning. Yeah.
It's about growing up with really funny parents who are also driven, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
But and I understand that reservation on his part.
But he was a little while in, he did start trusting me, and I showed him cuts of scenes, and he went, "Oh my God!" And so then we were off, and he was great. He was in both cases with Ben and Mike. I was so lucky to have kind of amazing on-the-job training with two of the best, funniest, most gifted comedy storytellers. So I really feel lucky to have that experience.
What is the secret to sequels? What do you think is the secret to keeping these characters true?
I feel like the Austin Powers films did keep adding something new. I didn't want to do. I've always needed something to keep myself interested enough to. And as soon as Mini-Me came onto our radar as a story idea, I was like, I'm in. And then as soon as we had the idea of getting Michael Caine and Beyonce in the third one, I was like, I'm in. In Meet the Parents, I really drug my feet on doing the sequel, Meet the Fockers, because we just kept trying, and I didn't know how to reset the predicament. You know, the predicament was actually resolved by the end. There, De Niro accepts him, so how do you make him not accept him anymore, or whatever? Like, right. And we tried. David O. Russell wrote a draft. We tried a whole bunch of different versions, and it wasn't happening. And everyone was getting a little impatient with me, because all I said was, hey, someone else can come and direct it. I'm not going to hold you up, but I don't have it yet. And this guy, Mark Hyman, who's a writer, came up with this idea that De Niro was obsessed with hothousing his grandchild, and that because he wanted he had a whole chart of, if he gets into this school, he'll get this. When he gets into that, he had all the forks in the road for excellence, like a great Santini type of character that he was. But to pull it off, he needed to be very focused on the genetic background of the child, the next child. So he was hothousing the other daughter's kid, but now if he was trying to imagine, well, what would Terry Polo's kid be like? And so he needed to know who were the Fockers. And so once we got that he was going to need to meet the Fockers at the end of the first one. Then it was like, well, who could play them that would be enough of a force? And we had Dustin first, and Barbara held out, but I kept trying, and I wrote the scene that got her in, which was she had this idea of being a therapist, and she loves talking kind of about inappropriate sexual stuff in a funny way, a really funny way. And I came up with this idea of having her be a sex therapist for old people. And so she coaches senior citizens in sexuality, and
perfect.
And then I helped write that scene where she gives De Niro a massage, and then she jumped in, and then we had it. We had a way to make a sequel worth it.
Right.
But
you had to have the stakes, and you had to have the great actors
and a great cast,
right.
You know. And so that's always been how you make it seem
right.
like.
And I think a lot of franchises just peter out because they're missing both of those elements.
Maybe. I mean, there's some great examles of sequels that have
Empire Strikes Back
to
was
work,
great. I'm not saying this.
But it's a high bar, and I didn't do it's a high bar. It's a high bar. So.
It is. Well, you achieved it, and congratulations on that franchise.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to talk about two HBO films that I sort of see as companions, which is Recount and Game Change. Recount in 2008, you were the director and EP, written by Danny Strong and produced by Sidney Pollack, which of course documented Florida's vote recount, who could forget, during the hotly contested 2000 presidential election. And then Game Change, written by Danny again, and of course starring Ed Harris, Julianne Moore, Woody Harrelson, Sarah Paulson, as we revisited.
Sarah Paulson. Oh,
She's so amazing.
Good.
2008 presidential campaign featuring John McCain, Sarah Palin, and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. What a time it was.
Yeah.
So in rewatching these films, it feels like a world that I barely recognize. People treating each other with respect. And the scene where during the debates where the woman was saying pejorative things about Obama and McCain pulls her aside and says, he's not like that. He's a patriot. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
How does it feel to think about these events and the way you told these stories, and what do these stories mean to you now?
That's a big question, but they each had very unique, considerations. I mean, they were therapy for me because I'm always thinking, and this was, I got to do comedies, but I really was much more of I wanted to be a dramatic, I wanted to be a storyteller that dealt with politics. And Sidney Pollack was a mentor of mine. I'd talked to him a bunch of times about all sorts of things, including calling him up and asking him if I was crazy to want to work with Barbra Streisand.
And what did he say?
He said, no, she's never been not the star. She's since 16, she only starred in her movies, and she then produced and directed them. And he said she might be kind of cool as an ensemble player. She's never done that. And he was right. He said, Dustin might be a challenge because he had worked with him and had struggles with him. And Dustin also turned out to be incredible. Both of them turned out to be incredibly sweet and cool. But he was going to do Recount, and he got sick. And he took me to lunch and said, I have some weird news. I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I want you to take over. And I was so devastated.
So sad.
And then I was, are you sure? Like, I hadn't got to do any dramas, and he knew I was interested. I said, well, and I had actually had a general meeting with Danny Strong because I had read the script, and maybe Sydney heard that. And I had met Danny and said, this is the most amazing. It was on the blacklist. It was the most amazing script. And
so it was originally going to be a feature before it went to HBO.
I'm not sure if it had a life like that. It might have always been at HBO, but it wasn't with me. And I just met this kid, Danny Strong, who wrote this great script and said, what else you got? What else you got? And somehow I think Danny might have been involved in suggesting it to
when Sydney shared that news with you, which must have been devastating, what did he tell you about his hope for telling the story, like his vision?
Well, he had only cast one person. He had cast Kevin Spacey to play Ron Klang, which was a ridiculous choice in a way because he doesn't look anything like him. But he liked the idea of just the acting chops, and he had started scouting in Jacksonville because there was a whole tax break thing, but it obviously was all set there, but he hadn't got to really start prepping yet, and he'd already been struggling with some of the health stuff, so he just hadn't. And so but it was I only had 8 weeks to prep, and it was short, so I just jumped in, and he wasn't really available then. He became available again in post, and I watched a bunch of cuts, but he gave me that break and to do drama. And then Danny, I pitched to Danny that Sarah Palin, the night she was introduced in Wright State in, I forget, Ohio or somewhere, I said, Susanna, that's the craziest choice I've ever seen, but I think it's going to work. And she said, she doesn't seem like it's going to work at all. I go, no, that's a good political move. How did they get to that decision? And then the more I read about it later, I pitched it to HBO, and both Danny and HBO passed. And then the book, I didn't know Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman already had the book Game Change, and there was only 2 chapters. We didn't do the Obama Clinton version. We just did those 2 chapters.
Focused on McCain choosing her as his running mate.
Just choosing her, and Steve Schmidt, because Steve, I saw a 60 Minutes thing where he regretted that choice, and he talked about when he realized, oh my God, she doesn't know anything. What are we going to do? We chose her.
Woody plays that so well.
I know,
he's so
and
great.
he plays so well at the end. You mentioned how civil. I love his speech at the end when she, as a vice president, wants to give a concession speech, and he says, you don't give concession speeches. This is a really cherished, important, handover of power. Is the opposite of what happened in 2020. This our country is based on this ability to
it's
say,
the pageantry of that.
you won. I accept the loss. God save the king or whatever. Like, it's not the king, but and he lectures her in such an amazing way. And that all happened. And Steve he didn't have approval over it, but we consulted with him a lot of the steps of the way. And I don't know if this is true, but I always feel like, what he's like now. He's a pretty anti-Trump person. And I feel like he enjoyed seeing himself actually do something truly heroic. It was truly heroic.
He's also hired to get this guy the presidency. His job is to position him accordingly to win.
Yeah, and he was doing the right thing, but then he realized, I don't think it's the right thing, and then he helped undo it, and that was the heroic thing. So I was really that was an amazing experience making that film and watching it. And we always thought, this will be a good cautionary tale. Maybe don't choose reality show, personalities as, and the same with Recount. I thought Recount would make us less likely to suppress votes. Interesting how full of myself I was.
So on those topics, can you imagine tackling any chapter of politics since this time in this same narrative format, now that we are so far down a rabbit hole that
I did
it's
a
hard
couple
to
others that were semi-political. Trumbo was that. I did the LBJ movie that Robert Schengen
All
did.
the Way?
That was All the Way. And I might need, just because they have been therapeutic, to be part of the conversation and do the research. It's actually helps me cope with my own anxiety, dream about what's happening in the world. And so I think my next thing I'm working on a couple things that are very political, and some I think I watched even watching One Battle After Another, and I'm trying to think of other ones where there's a historical element that has a bearing on what's going on now, but is its own thing. Have anybody seen the Mussolini show?
No.
There's a show, no one's seeing it. Joe Wright directed it, and it's crazy great.
Wow.
With this Italian actor, all in Italian. Maybe that's why
That's
one's
probably
seeing it.
why. But we will check it out now.
It's amazing, and it's all about now, but it's
so kind
really
of the Italian
it's about
version
Mussolini,
of,
know. And so I think doing something a little further back in history, because then people lower their skepticism about those stories.
Well, what I enjoyed about essentially a Cranston double feature, Trumbo and All the Way, is that we had two somewhat ill-equipped but very patriotic men trying in their own way to preserve democracy. LBJ was a very flawed guy, very eccentric, very sort of kind of a strange choice for president. He did his best.
He accomplished so much. And in both of those stories, patriotism and its fragility are at the center. So I would love to know, as an artist, what does patriotism mean to you in terms of storytelling? That's an interesting question. That's a really interesting question. It's become such a loaded term in so many different ways. But I guess I really believe in the most idealistic version of democracy. That what happened, as and we're working on a constitutional convention story too, but that what happened as people started to shed interest in monarchies or theocracies or whatever, is that for people to feel like they're actually involved and have a stake in something is both humanistic but also stabilizing. That people, if they feel like they're involved, in the old days, if you wanted power, you would ride your horse into the court and say, okay, I'm the baddest motherfucker around. Who wants to fight me right now? And if you don't, then I'm in charge. And that was
or you just
civilization.
Get shot dead in the middle of town.
And it was the idea that violence is the way to hand off power from one person to the other, one community to another, one institution to another, is insane. And so there was hope from democracy, and our democracy has never been a pure democracy. It's always, and just the most horrible things still occurred even in democracy. I'm reading now about Reconstruction, and I just didn't know. That's the area I want to maybe get to cover, because it's a repressed history that we just don't think about at all, and I didn't learn about it. And there's just so much of history that wants to be denied and repressed, and so I want to do something that's the kind of story that is the most targeted kind of story to keep making people forget. And anyway, so that's patriotism to me, is how can you have a conversation about what really works and how to really empower people, all people, not just rich people, not just white people, not just like, how do you empower everybody? And to me, I don't know a better, as Churchill said, the only thing worse than democracy is everything else, right? So that's
Right.
still how I look at it, and that's, I guess that's patriotic.
It is.
Right.
And I think we need to take some of that back and kind of redefine what it means.
Yeah.
So on Bombshell, I want to talk about one of my favorite films of the last 2 years, 2019. You were the director and producer. And for those who haven't seen it, it's a fictionalized account of the women who brought down Roger Ailes, the chairman and chief executive of Fox News. Written by Charles Randolph, someone I had the pleasure of speaking to a number of times during that awards season. And of course, starring Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, Margot Robbie. And I was rereading some of the reviews of Bombshell over the weekend, and the New York Times review, which was positive, it made a really great point, which I had thought about, which said, how do you make heroines out of characters that some in the audience will see as deeply compromised, if not outright villains? Essentially, how are we supposed to root for these women who had benefited from this horrible system they are trying to dismantle? So when you and Charlize sat down to talk about your shared vision and her vision for playing Megyn Kelly, who's a very divisive person, how did you want to address that out of the gate?
It's a good question, and there was a lot going on at that time. 3 days into the shoot, Megyn Kelly made the comment about, I think blackface should be okay if it's for Halloween. And
I remember.
And we were already filming, and we were already almost doing a Steve Schmidt kind of thing. We're giving her credit. She did a pretty amazing thing by taking on Roger Ailes. And
She didn't help herself with those comments.
well, and it made us like, oh my God, where's this gonna go? And Charles Randolph, who wrote the screenplay, and I and Charlize got together that night of the third day of the shoot, and just like, oh my God, we're so in the middle of this. We had Nicole Kidman and Margot Robbie and John Lithgow and all these incredible, it was a really, and Annapurna had been our studio, and then they had backed out because I always suspected because of Larry Ellison, because it was
And then it went over to Lionsgate.
and then we went to Lionsgate and Braun, but I never got confirmation of that, so it's just it was just always a question of, well, is that what happened? But so it was already, we knew we were going to be in the spotlight, and especially after that comment, which is so controversial. So we started shifting a little bit of the point of view of the story to Margot's character, who was a composite of a bunch of women we had talked to who had been through some of those things. And that meant, we would just try to invite the audience to connect to her and have her sort of dealing with Megyn Kelly's character, as opposed to having it be a little more from Megyn Kelly's point of view.
We do sort of see the movie through Kayla's eyes because she's the newbie.
And increasingly so, because at first you kind of sense that it's what Megyn went through with Roger Ailes, but by the end it's Margot's character who throws the badge away and walks out as a little, pretty direct version of that. But I love that scene. Love is the wrong word for it. I was so blown away and moved by the scene where he harasses her in his office.
Horrible.
I was operating the camera. I don't usually operate, but I wanted it to be as small a group as possible, and I needed a big wide shot, so I just set up the camera on the wide shot. And I don't know if I've ever filmed anything that was so chilling and so devastating.
It felt more disturbing now to see that for some reason.
Really, yeah. I haven't watched it in a while, but it's.
On a lighter note, it was interesting to see
devastating.
Kate McKinnon refer to that character as Anchor Barbie, which is funny to know what would come a few years later.
Yeah, casting Kate, I'm really proud of that, because it added a whole other level of, absurdity sometimes and gave Kayla a way to be more self-aware. So that also kind of evolved once we were like, oh, this is the, and Charles Randolph is great at that. He's a really great writer, and really fun to collaborate with him.
And of course, he did The Big Short too, which I cannot fathom writing that script. That was so dense and incredible.
He's really good.
How did Megyn Kelly feel about the movie ultimately? And did she contact you? Did she share her feelings with you? Because Roger Ailes passed away before the movie came out. I don't know how she felt about it so much during the making of it or what, but she
she hosted a screening with some friends of hers at one point after it came out, and she kind of credited the authenticity of some of the moments, but she didn't like that we made her seem slightly compromised in a couple of places. And I think, I don't remember if she that was a public thing, that she aired that on maybe it was a podcast or something, I don't remember, but I don't remember. I know just publicly that she and Charlize have gotten into it over other things since then, and I don't know how she actually feels about it now. It'd be interesting to ask her about, just to see what she's evolved in a certain way that might make her want to be even tougher on it now, but I actually don't know.
Well, she always has a lot of opinions, that's for sure.
She what?
She always has a lot of opinions.
Yes,
that's for sure. And why she's very successful for that reason. And now I'd like to talk about The Roses, which came out this year. You're the director and producer, written by Tony McNamara, the genius behind The Favorite and The Great, one of my favorite
And Poor
writers.
Things.
And Poor Things, of course.
That's a great one.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that this was actually originally based on a novel, not Danny DeVito's movie 1989, but the novel by Warren Adler, about a wealthy couple whose seemingly ideal marriage devolves into the divorce from hell. And of course, the movie starred Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner. Incredible performances. So in reimagining an IP like this, what most worried you, but also what most excited you about the possibilities that exist for telling a new version of this story?
The main thing was Benedict and Olivia. I mean, they had worked on it before with Tony, so they'd evolved it before. And when I heard they were attached, I don't know. I might have just said, is it a phone book? I'll direct that. Like with those two, I just didn't care almost. But then I read the script and it was really good and it was different. I didn't want to just do a remake of that film. I really liked that original film in its own way. I love Danny. I did get to work with him, and he's always been super cool. And when I called him and said I was doing it, he was like, "Oh, that's going to be great." He was super supportive of the idea of doing it. But it was so different. It's so different that it's called The Roses, so it's not. So we're kind of copying to the fact that it's not trying to be and I did find it to be sort of, again, therapeutic and a coping way in terms of cautionary tale about relationships and ego and ambition. And my wife and I have both been super busy people and have had big ambition and different ups and downs, definitely ups and downs. So coping with that, watching those characters coping and seeing that the ego monster is the real monster.
So how do you keep the ego monster at bay in a Hollywood relationship? Because it is really, really tough.
Yeah, we're so lucky and privileged. My wife had such a huge career before I knew her, and so she was already so established. I was just full-on loser when she met me. I literally had no real... That is
not true,
I had no real career, and I didn't have a car. I had a VW Vanagon bus that would catch on fire every third time, and I had a pillow you could use to put out the carburetor fire.
Wait, so how did you guys meet initially?
We met on a blind date. That the science fiction guy who went in to run Sci-Fi Channel, Mark Stern, she kind of initiated. She knows what she wants, and she said, I want to meet somebody who's not an actor and not I know she dated a lot of actors and musicians, and so we met on a blind date. The story, she says, I don't want to just have it be me and this person and have it be this awkward thing, because he had already told her about me a little bit. The thing that she says that she liked about me is that I'd gone to a good school, but that I was a professor, because I was teaching cinematography. She had a thing about professors. Also, I'm now remembering there's a Bangles song called "If She Knew What She Wants." Yeah, well, so there you go. This is all making a lot more sense. She just wrote a new song that's it's too much information. But anyway, she came to my class. I don't know, so the first date though, the weird thing about that was that she said not just me and him, invite other couples. So he the host invited two other couples that had never met. So it was almost like a like a weird speed dating night, but none of the women showed up. His wife didn't show up, the host's wife didn't show up, and neither of the other two eligible bachelorettes showed up.
That's
So
terrible.
it was 3 guys and Sue and a host, and it literally was the dating game. I just happened to show up early. I pulled out her chair and helped her get her jacket off, and she said, no one's ever done that. And
She's like, I grew up in LA.
I
No
know.
one's ever done
I thanked
that.
my mom, my Texas mom, for teaching me a little chivalry.
So you are a rarity in a lot of ways these days, in that I feel like the marketplace, especially during award season, is very auteur centered now. The writer, director, it's Greta Gerwig, it's Chris Nolan, it's the Safdie brothers, these people who are sort of incubating their own work and then directing their own work.
Sure.
Has your place in the marketplace shifted because of this? And is it harder to find jobs where you can pop in and direct, Tony McNamara, brilliant script, and then direct that person?
I don't know. It's always been, I'm a fan of the great auteurs too. When I was learning about film, I just was in awe of all the great auteurs, and I just didn't know, I didn't have that thing like we were talking about. So the way Sidney went at filmmaking, and Spielberg is a little bit this way too, where he's not usually the writer, where he just devotes himself to the story. And Sidney, I just watched 3 Days of the Condor the other day. I was just watching Tootsie again. I was watching The Slender Thread with Anne Bancroft and Sidney Poitier that he did as a Playhouse 90 thing. Every single thing he did was, he just devoted himself to the style that the story wanted. He wasn't trying to, and he did write on them sometimes, but he often didn't take credit. I write on things too, and I don't take credit because
I
want
do a lot of magic behind the scenes.
Well, there's stuff going on, but I just didn't have the personal drive or the self-esteem to think my version of the world was what I should just devote myself to it. I'm getting a little more that way. Like I'm saying, I'm really interested in doing a David Lynchy kind of thing, because that's my actual personal vibe in the world is, oh my God, oh shit, it's so scary, I don't know what's going on, and that I'm always just so terrified. And so I was saying the other day, I don't know what it's like to dream anything other than anxiety dreams. I've never had a dream that I remembered that wasn't a horrific, nightmarish anxiety dream. Every dream is this horrible predicament, and I just wake up with my heart racing, and I don't know how. So that would be my truest form, is to make an anxiety. And in a way, Meet the Parents was that, and even the political films are that. I always sort of think of them as anxiety dreams, like, oh my God, how's this going to work out? But I didn't have that personal stamp requirement on the stories, and I actually think it's been an advantage in a lot of ways, because most of my gigs, my favorite gigs, have, except for Game Change, which I really did initiate, have been actors coming to me. Charlize brought that to me. Benedict and Olivia brought roses to me. Will Ferrell and Zach Galifianakis brought me the campaign. Like actors who I've known for whatever reason, or they liked something I did.
Maybe it's because they know you have a light enough touch, and you're going to let them do their thing.
I'm going to let them do their thing. And
because I think all those guys you mentioned, those are big brands of performers.
And Mike, the way Mike did it, I wanted Ben for Meet the Parents. He wasn't going to do it at first, but so it's rare for me to chase the actors, and I think because I'm not an auteur, nobody says, oh, he only does his own things, because that's what you hear whenever I want to get a great writer who's also a filmmaker. They go, oh, he only does his own things. Well, I'll do anything great, especially if it's got great actors, and that actually gives me more chance at working. I think I've been able to sustain the career because I was open to that.
And you've done a lot of great TV too, which by the way this is where 85% of our content is. It's great limited series on HBO. You've won a ton of Emmys. Like those were really smart choices.
Those were the movies for TV, which they're not going to make anymore. They've declared they're not doing that anymore. I've had uneven luck in series. I keep hoping I have an overall deal there at HBO, and we're working on a few things.
What does resilience mean to you? Because we were just talking about that backstage, and you talked about it with the students at Stanford.
Yeah.
I'm curious what that means to you now at this stage of your career, as you're still working it out. We're all still trying to understand who we are in this space. But what does that mean to you now?
It's hard to talk about it without sounding whiny, because I'm so lucky. I've had such an amazing series of collaborations, and I've been able to sort of ride on so many other people's shoulders. But I I was reminding myself that I gave a speech at the commencement of USC Film School a few years ago, and I told this story of how I broke up with my college girlfriend, who I thought I was going to be with forever, and I was in the middle of film school, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing. I had been offered a bunch of ways to get through film school, and I just couldn't make up. I couldn't make a decision, and I just drove. I'm leaving. I'm driving home. I'm gonna get in my beat up old Honda at that time, and I just headed for New Mexico. I'm out. This is it. And about halfway into Arizona, I said, oh shit, I can't leave. So I went back into California, and then I went, I got to get out of here. And then I went back into Arizona, and I kept going back and forth across the Colorado River until I stopped on the bridge at sunset and just started bawling. I didn't know what to do. I was literally
at a
stranded
crossroads.
at a crossroads. And I finally just said, you got to go back. So I went back to film school. I got a film, and every single experience, Sydney said this to me too, every single film, a few weeks before I start shooting, I'm literally trying to get out of it. I've called all my reps and say, is there some way I can get out of this? I know I'm under contract, but can I? This is so not going to work. It's not going to work. I got to get out of this. And Sydney said it was the greatest thing. He said he had done that on every single film, called his reps and tried to get out of it. And it's a kind of panic. It's a kind of trying too hard. It's a kind of series of delusions you fall for about the stories you tell yourself about how unlikely something is going to work. And nothing is going to work if you wait for anything. Guillermo said last year I was at a thing with him, and he said the natural state of every production is to not happen.
This is Guillermo del Toro,
yeah,
I'm assuming.
Guillermo del Toro. And that's just a natural thing. So for me, the natural state of my brain is to fall apart. And so to somehow find a way to just, I don't know, just
so you've been really brave is what you're saying.
Just to keep going. No, it's not bravery, because it's all self-created. It's bullshit stuff. It's not like I'm having they're usually make-believe obstacles. They're anxiety dreams. They're things that my brain has told me are going to kill me, that I have to somehow take a breath and think about it. Attitude of gratitude. My Texas mom always used to say, just think of all the things you're grateful for, and don't go to bed mad. Like to get with whoever's driving you crazy, to go and talk to them, at the end of the day, and try to work it out and just keep going. And that's a coping mechanism. I'm not articulating well how I get over those things, but it's mostly, I'll just say one last thing about it. And I was talking about this last night. I've said this is a little bit of a cliche now for me, because I've said it before, but I'll just say it anyway, because I really believe it. I become what I call a benign cult leader on every film. I become so devoted to the story that I treat it like it is literally handed to us from a deity, and it is scripture, and not necessarily the script, because scripts aren't always the manifestation of it, but sometimes they are, like on Tony's stuff or Charles Randolph things. But sometimes it's just, I know what this story could be. I want to preach it to you all every day, all day long, and have you feel like you're in this dream with us, not with me, not personally. I actually don't have enough ego to do that, but I know the story is worth it. Let's keep going. Let's find that shot. What's stopping us? I always say, what's stopping us right now? Why aren't we shooting right this second? Because the dream is not happening. The story is not getting told. I'm being told that the budget is too much, or the location fell out of. Okay, well, let's go. Like, you become a zealot. You become a freaking mad person. And that's my coping strategy. That's the only thing I know how to use to get me past that terror that is perpetual in my brain.
Well,
on that light note, good luck, everybody.
I can only speak for me, but I'm sure everyone agrees. We're so glad you didn't go to law school, Jay Roach. We are so inspired by you and your resilience. Even though you're too humble to say it, you're quite a model for, I think, what a lot of us aspire to in this business. So
thanks,
thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for putting
Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you. Thanks for your interest. Thank you very much. Fun.
My Hollywood Story is a production of Hippolyta Films and Entertainment. The series is written, produced, and hosted by me, Stacey Wilson Hunt. Executive producers for Hippolyta are Sonia Slutsky and Wendy Green. Series producers also include Daryl Young and Janet Grayson. Our camera operator, sound mixer, and editor is Ramiro Cantu. Original music for My Hollywood Story is by Madi Gavriel and Jenny Carr of Moon and Star. Our logo design was created by Brad Mitchell. And I would like to give a very special thanks to Soho House West Hollywood for being the official new home of our show. We couldn't do it without you. This episode of My Hollywood Story was recorded live at Soho House West Hollywood. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and let us know what you think.